You know, there is a saying, a very old saying, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. It will take dedication, it will take time.
Why are you so eager to help me?
Because once, a long time ago, you did the same for me.
So this story starts back in 2007 when we had the opportunity to solicit working with the Chinese and the Chinese national team in during the Beijing Olympics. So I have affectionately titled it, Skio China, the Greatest Story Never Told. And it's funny, I've got nerves going on in this one. Never had nerves going on when I'm up here, but I've got nerves going on today. Isn't that nutty? Okay, so Skio China, the greatest story never told. Itinerary. We're going to discuss Skio China in the Beijing 2008 Olympics is where it begins. We're going to discuss running a 2-year, $6 million per year corporate contract with the China Development Bank, which is the 3rd largest bank in China. We're going to discuss Skio and the SFDA, the findings and our experience in working with the FDA, which has become probably the most stringent licensing board in the world at this point. And we're going to discuss Skio China and the public and private hospital system. So strap your seatbelts in and get ready, because here we go. Everything that you're going to see in this presentation would not have been possible but for the work of the people in this list. And I'm very, very grateful that I got to surf this wave, per se, and be on this journey, this ride. But without these people, that would have never been possible. So I would very much like to thank Bill Nelson and QX International, including Andrea, including Edit, including Richard, many sleepless nights supporting us, getting the documents we needed both for the SFDA, supporting us in creative ideas for working with national level athletes, just for everything that they do, for development of the Skio, for funding, for being a part of funding the Beijing Olympics 2008. So, before we even get started, just a big round of applause for Bill Nelson. Thank you. Also, thanks goes to Brian Thompson, TQA, Roger Lassard, the Quantum Knights, Xiaolong Ke, the head of Greenlong Health China, Li Guoping, the Minister of Sport Medicine China, Jeff Sutton, Li Ping Jiao, Yinlin, Tara Geerdink, Kente, Rodney Bali, Laura Franklin Leatherman, my wife and son. And thank you to all of you, because without every single one of us actively creating in the ether on a daily basis, there again, none of this would have been possible. It is but each one of us creating a quantum magnet which has enabled us to step forward in this industry and bring this important technology to the world. And ultimately, at this point, especially after everything that I've done in China, is that that I've seen that there is a place for this device in mainstream integration. And as we continue to go through the lecture this afternoon, what we're going to find is that the device is absolutely capable of duplicating results, as well as results in testing, as well as cause and effect in working with therapy. So just a big thank you goes out to every single one of you, because honestly, without all of us together, this wouldn't have happened, nor would the future be as potentialful and bright. So big thank you, and a big round of applause before we get into this one. So here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3, yes. Okay, and of course I have to give special thanks thanks to the mastermind of the whole thing, Victor, the man to the right, and if we're working from your perspective, I still think he's on the right. The one not in the sport coat. His name is Jalon Victor Cook. In, I guess it would have been October of 2007, Victor took a trip out to China to expose the ski out to some people within government and see what happened. Within 3 days, he was led through the president of China's brother, because he is very, very well connected. Oh my God. In 3 days of being in China and putting up feelers in regards to the device, the Chinese were very progressive, very interested in working with the device and the technology, or at least learning about it. And he was put to the Minister of Sport Medicine China, the gentleman that you see in the blazer. Funny enough, in that blazer, it was right before he was about to go for the walk for the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, which was really cool. Anyways, Victor was put in touch with Li Guoping. Li Guoping watched a promotional DVD about the ski-up. And at 6 a.m. the following morning, he was on the phone calling Victor saying, we need to take a look at this. We need your people down here. So in December of 2007, we were invited to the Sport Medicine Hospital in China, the Federal Sport Medicine Hospital. And we were offered the preliminary opportunity to test all of the doctors in the hospital, offer in China what is diagnostic reporting through the device, supportive diagnostic reporting, because the device is recognized in China for diagnosis and treatment. Okay. Biofeedback equipment, by the nature of the licensing there, is recognized that way. Hence, it's been a very stringent process getting our licensing through. But we went out there in December of 2007 in order to expose the technology to the doctors, enable them to confer and decide whether or not this was something that they wanted to take part in, and enable us to actually work with the athletes. So once again, we tested every single one of the doctors, had to issue reports which were then scrutinized by the board. And at the end of this trip, we were really, really lucky. Li Guoping had done a residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, New York. He was a very, very progressive mind for the typical Chinese mindset. And you have no idea. And he understood the concept of the quantum. He could grab that. And so he was very, very open-minded, and he supported us just in the biggest of big ways, and enabled us to have access to all the athletes. So in the beginning was the creation of how it was going to work. After they had seen it, they had chosen to implement a program working with us. Therein, the foundation was set, or we were working to set at that point, the foundation for what it was going to be, what the Olympics were going to be with ski-up. And initially, before we could even start working in any training capacity with the athletes, working in any therapeutic training capacity, we initially had to be scrutinized through the reporting function and see what the response was to the device working at the national sport level. So the program, before they would even let us touch an athlete in therapy, the program began with us testing over 358 national athletes in China. We did that in 6 weeks. There were 2 of us. There were 2 of us. You'll notice a little bit of gray in this beard of mine right here. And in fact, the Olympics was such an insane experience because we were literally pulling 18, 20-hour days for 4.5 months straight without a day off, Jeff and myself. Like, it was just above and beyond. So 358 national athletes tested. The way that happened was as the athletes were coming into Beijing, being moved from their respective provinces, they were brought through the federal hospital in order to start their initial drug testing and their initial physicals to be approved for competition. So as they were coming in and getting their blood work done, so were they getting their bioenergetic scanning. I thought that in and of itself was just a huge step forward for us. It was amazing to be a part of their initial screening process. That was just absolutely brilliant, brilliant. So 358 athletes were tested before we ever had the opportunity to touch an athlete therapeutically. And initially in testing, we were not even allowed to talk to the athlete. There was no intake information allowed at all. We were blindly assessing from data. An athlete would come in, they would get tested, we would copy the data folder, they would leave. So on average, Jeff and I were having to put together 10 to 15 diagnostic reports per day. And considering it took us about 45 minutes in process to get one done, and the process was bloody arduous, it was quite a feat, hence the alopecia. Oh yeah, look, no beard, that's why. Okay, so after we had ultimately passed go with testing, and we weren't even allowed to offer our findings directly to the athlete. It was initially done where we would assess the athlete, offer our reports to our board, that group of doctors that you saw sitting at the table, offer our reports to the board. They had to pass the board, be compared to physical tests, the physical tests which were done in the hospital, and then released by the doctors to the coaches. We were never allowed to even talk to the athletes. And upon our success with 358 tested, we were really invited to the show. And this is really where the journey began with the Olympics. With speed walking. Isn't that exciting? A big round of applause for speed walking. Who knew that was an Olympic sport? Really? You know, speed walking? Well, I mean, by the condition that you can see this athlete, it was surprising to me. However, it very much in the beginning, because they were playing it very, very safe with us. They were initially just giving us athletes, which they both expected to medal, but that they weren't so concerned about. And so we were given speed walking, which to me felt like turtle racing. Right? But I suppose, we were given national level athletes about to compete in the Olympics, hence we should have been very grateful, and I guess I was. So we started with speed walking, and we tested the entire speed walking team. And before they would let us do therapy, even though we had been cleared at the national level, the team coaches and the team doctors, sports is riddled in politics. The team doctors and the team coaches first were going to scrutinize us and ensure that what we had was of value. So after we tested the initial the athletes, we were then up against their team of doctors once again, having to prove ourselves. Everything in China was proving ourselves. It was all such that there were stages. So initially was the testing stage, and if we passed this testing stage, they would move us into therapy with athletes. And if we passed the therapy, by passed I mean we had the approval and the acceptance of the team, and we boasted good results, they would then enable us to work with higher profile athletes, etc., and moving on into different realms. So we started with speed walking, and they were being very, very cautious with everything it was that we were doing. And then getting the athletes initially to agree to therapy was also difficult because they couldn't understand the concept. And that close to competition, athletes are very, very insecure. So this was the first athlete we were able to get onto the device and work in therapy with. And he was just the sweetest, kindest guy you can see by the light on the face. He was just an absolute darling. And he enabled us to really connect to the athletes, because with this particular athlete, and for the purpose of this tape, such that it is understood, every athlete in which we discuss anything personal as to the work that we did and what symptoms they had, what symptoms they had improved, have all been released and authorized. I have been authorized to discuss this about the athlete now. It's my honor to present this because Professor Nelson has never seen these pictures either, and in some ways he paid for them. So this is my gift to you. Where our story really started, and the Chinese names are so hard to remember, so I needed to flip back there for a second. Where our story really starts in therapy was working with Liu Heng. Liu Heng was a gold medal athlete from Athens. She won gold in speed walking in Athens, so they had expectations of her performance in Beijing. However, for 3 months prior to our arrival, she had been experiencing cardiac insufficiency. Yeah, and there was symptoms of chest pains, chronic fatigue, and she had lost serious ground in reference to her performance. Working with the device in 5 sessions, all of her symptoms went away. Subsequently, from the work that we did, her performance was back up to its peak potential. And it was amazing to see the shift in this athlete, because this started in what I would have considered a more physical blockage, not physical in a structural, but a more energetic blockage. But it was very, very exciting to be able to see the device work with the athletes and ultimately be able to boast the results in which we saw. What I discovered in working with sports and working with athletes is that their bodies were so fine-tuned that working with the device very much felt like flipping a switch, more so than the training that it would seem with your average client, because their bodies were so responsive. It was just an incredible, incredible experience. So working with Yu Hung, we were able to support her release of symptoms, and she was our first gold medal athlete. And that was very exciting, because once we had really boasted success in therapy, this is when they started opening it all up to us and giving us everyone. And this was our first success story. So from speed walking, they were still playing it somewhat safe, and they gave us men's trampoline. And once again, initially I thought men's trampoline, oh my God, this is a little better than turtle racing, but still not quite the Olympic features that we're hoping for here, right? And so with men's trampoline, this was a really exciting story, though, and it was so wonderful for me to put together this presentation, because I hadn't even looked at these pictures in about 3.5 years. And once I got into the memories of this story and then on from this point, wow, what an experience. So we started with men's trampoline, and men's trampoline was the story of Dong Dong versus Lu Chen Long. Dong Dong versus Lu Chen Long. You see, the Chinese knew that they were the best in the world at the trampoline event. So the competition was internal. Even though it was a World Olympic national event, they walked in very, very much knowing that they were the best in the world. And once again, they were being cautious with us, giving us athletes that they knew would perform. So Dong Dong versus Lu Chen Long. Dong Dong won gold in Athens and had won every major event in trampoline for the 4 years in between. Lu Chen Long was a younger athlete who was also a very insecure athlete, and was overshadowed by Dong Dong for years. And yes, his name really was Dong Dong. So like everything, our work commenced in testing. Now, working with Dong Dong, because he was the gold medal trampoline athlete, he won every major world event. Working with Dong Dong, he was not as interested in therapy as the second string athlete, Lu Chen Long. And so with Lu Chen Long, you can see, right from the moment he came in, he was on a mission, but his confidence was not there. And our work with him was emotional, and it really showed me the potential of the device, especially with athletes, and Chinese athletes to boot, as the Chinese by nature are a very emotionally conservative culture. Ooh, conservative culture. What an eloquent way of saying that. An emotionally conservative culture. One might say repressed. And so working with Lu Chen Long, we were really able to release, in working with him, and being able to detect a lot of the emotional stressors through both the sport panel with the conflict issues, which we were able to see through that panel, as well as how he was reacting to flower essences and Bach flowers. We were really able to understand the nature of his emotional stress, which really had all to do with confidence and fear. What I found with these types of athletes, when they were jumping 100 feet in the air, there was fear. year. Surprise. But in working with him, we did 10 sessions. And in those 10 sessions, by the point that we hit the 8th session, Dong Dong was very curious. Dong Dong was very interested. You see, because what he had started witnessing was in their practices, Liu Chenlong was outperforming him. Okay, so we were really able to, through our technology, as all of us know, interface, understand the athlete emotionally, and really be able to profile and enable him a dialogue and the ability to release. And what happened was amazing. In working with Liu Chenlong, we saw Dong Dong. He came out as Dong Dong always apparently did, and he performed beautifully, as did Liu Chenlong. But you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph to the right-hand side, where he is upside down, there is the Life magazine picture. He was featured in Life magazine for his performance in the Olympics. And not only was this his first medal in a national event, he won gold. Wow. And was further featured by Life magazine. And this was a second string athlete that they did not expect results from. Now, what was exciting was when we moved into women's trampoline. So from men's trampoline into women's trampoline, getting more exciting. Isn't that bird's nest just awesome? Wow, eh? I mean, what an amazing thing the Olympics did for the Chinese city of Beijing. It was just unbelievable, the infrastructure that was built to support it. They just went all out. It was crazy. So women's trampoline. And women's trampoline, once again, like men's trampoline, wasn't so much a national event as it was a Chinese event, again, because the Chinese were just absolutely dominating the sport. So this one became the tale of Huang Shanshan versus He Wenna. Huang Shanshan, like Dong Dong, had won every major event since 2004. He Wenna was a second string athlete who was injured. She had a knee injury. And her performance, due to hormonal stress, her performance had been not up to par coming into the games, yet she was still number 2 in the country. However, she had never once placed first in any major competition. So, working with Huang Shanshan and He Wenna, we were, once again, everything began with testing. We were able to do therapy again with He Wenna. With Huang Shanshan, like Dong Dong, she was the gold medal athlete. She wasn't interested in working with us. As far as she was concerned, everything was perfect. With He Wenna, there was an athlete who had been overshadowed, so confidence was an issue. Also, there was a knee injury, and there was hormonal stress. In the past, as I said, Huang Shanshan had won every event. The best He Wenna had ever placed was a bronze. And once again, Huang Shanshan came out, her performance was exceptional. However, He Wenna, the athlete in which we worked with 10 times in therapy, whom we worked very substantially on the pain in her knee and releasing the symptom in her knee. Also, she had not menstruated for 6 months from overtraining. This is where, in therapy, it was very important that we had the athletes coming off with the experience of having had the therapy, with confidence in the device, if we were to be able to see them again. Because at that point, it was all left to the athlete as to whether or not they wanted to give us the opportunity to work with them. All the work was done over their resting period. So if they were going to come and give us their very limited rest time, that we had best boast results. So with He Wenna, we worked with the knee, and there was a release of symptoms in the knee. Hence, you can see that the bandage she's wearing is not very supportive. When we started, she had one of those full supportive braces with the metal and the hinges at the side. When we started with her, that's how she was competing. By the end, she had a little tensor bandage that she was working with. And what I learned was, initially in the first 2 or 3 sessions, I was not getting the hormonal results. And the coaches were in fear that she would start menstruating during the sport, during competition, and that her performance would subsequently decrease and her potential would decrease. After 3 sessions, I was not able to boast any results, and that led me to thinking about using the device differently, which has moved my personal work from this particular case in a completely different way. I had always heard, having never really worked with Bill, I had always heard that Bill's work with the device was always approached in a very minimalistic manner. And what I thought was, what would happen if I attempted to just really focus using one therapy panel on a specific area of issue? And so with this athlete, in order to work with the hormonal stress that I saw, I recognized that it was the byproduct of overtraining, the emotional stress, and everything. And I recognized that that stress very much rested within the realm of the chakra. And so using the scalar panel, I set to a 30-minute lower chakra release. Now, I would venture to say that everybody in this room, or very few in this room, have ever actually used the little timer box next to the lower chakra release in the scalar panel. Having set that 30-minute session, the following day, she started to menstruate. And we saw this as we saw this exact process with the athletes applying this exact therapy play out in a very repetitious fashion. We saw absolutely consistency in applying this therapy when we were working with that issue. And so we were able to support her in her release of pain. We were able to support her in her release of hormonal stress and enabling her body to restore its homeostasis. And we were able to interface the emotions by understanding them through the device. We were able to support her in the release of those things. And subsequently, she won gold. So it was the story of Dong Dong, Huang Chen Chen, He Wen'e, and Liu Chenlong, which really got the attention of the coaches within sports. And at this point, we were sought after. And this is where it became exciting. We moved from women's trampoline into men's diving. Now, men's diving, here you were you were getting the opportunity to work with the spotlight of the Olympics. Men's diving was absolutely one of the feature events of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And this is where my work, where I became really excited by the work. I mean, the whole thing was an amazing ride, right? But it was, suddenly men's diving. Yeah. Okay, so we started working with the men's diving team, and we ultimately worked with all of the athletes for the diving team. And we started with Kai Chin and with Wang Feng, and we were able to work with them in therapy. There were no major symptoms that were prevalent with the men's diving team, short of the release of the emotional stress leading into the games. And of course, you saw the stress of anticipation, you saw the stress of performance, and you saw the stress of poor performance in times past. And it was a beautiful experience to be able to understand the athlete in that way when they could not communicate. And I speak Chinese. But when they could not communicate what the nature of their emotional stress was, they were never given that dialogue or that language. And sports in China is very much like the old feel of the USSR back in the day. Do what you're told. Make no waves. Say nothing. Right? So working with the diving team was really exciting. And after we worked with our athletes, I mean, we were able to support them in the release of emotional stress. Did we see their performance and their consistency improve? Absolutely we did. And working with these two, isn't that great? Yeah. I mean, but it shows you the rate at which they're spinning when you see his cheeks in that state. Isn't it unbelievable? And of course, once again, gold.
Question?
Yes.
Initially, you could just do testing and there was no interaction. When you started to work with the specific athletes and you're seeing the emotional issues come up and you're saying they're a repressed society, at that point, are you having conversations with them around?
That's where it really. Thank you for asking the question. The question was, so at this point in our experience in China, were we able to begin the dialogue process with athletes, especially when doing the emotional work? From the work and the accomplishments of the trampoline team, we were now able to dialogue the athlete. And that was just a huge step forward for us because, once again, they were all in fear that we would dialogue with the athlete and we would bring them into an insecure, fear-based state prior to competition. And that close to a world competition, the athletes were all very, very insecure. It was absolutely smart on their behalf to not allow us to dialogue until they saw what it was that we were going to be doing with the athletes. So yes, we were able at this point to dialogue. And that was yet again another stage that we had passed in order to get there. And after we worked with the two big boys, we had the two little guys, Huo Liang and Lin Yu, both of which gold medal athletes, or the two in the beginning were gold medal athletes in Athens. These two had never placed in the world circuit. And what was really, really interesting, what was his name again? Lin Yu. Lin Yu's father was a quantum physicist. His mother was a doctor. So when he came into the hospital, all these pictures were taken in the sport medicine hospital in Beijing. When he came into the hospital, he was really interested in learning more about the device. And it's very, very possible he was looking to purchase one. I don't know if that happened, but he was very keen and very excited. And this was really great because finally, not only were we dialoguing with the athletes, but we were becoming friends with the athletes. And this was a really cool progression. So both of these guys, after support with the device, both working with nutritional balancing as well as emotional support, both of these athletes came out and performed and gold medals. Women's diving. So after success with men's diving, we were given the women. And the women, you'll discover as we go through this presentation today looking at sports, the women in China perform much better than the men on the world circuit. And when we were given women's diving, this was a huge honor because the first athlete you're going to see in this slide, Guo Jingjing, she's known as the queen of diving. Guo Jingjing had won every event in diving over the past 10 years leading up to the Beijing Olympics. Every event. And what was interesting was with Guo Jingjing, we were really able to do some very deep work therapeutically, and this there again a lot, the majority of that work being within the emotional realm of release. Guo Jingjing did not want to compete for these Olympics. She had won every major event coming into the games. She had recently been married to a very affluent man in Hong Kong, and she did not want to compete. She was forced by China to compete in these games because the games were at home and this was national pride, national face. And what we discovered was, as we worked with the national sport program, we discovered these types of problems whereby the state could impose on an athlete. The athlete was in essence owned by the state. The state could impose on them mandatory competition. And working with Guo Jingjing, she was like razor sharp, like ice. When she competed, it wasn't a question of nerves or effort. She had this down, but she did not want to compete. And so working with her, you can see Victor made a point of posing with her because she by far would have been probably the second most famous athlete in China. There were posters and pictures of her in every mall, on every bus, on every subway. She was everywhere. So working with her was a beautiful experience, an honor for me. You saw Victor was making sure he was in the pictures with her. She came out and she did what she always does. She performed, and she won gold. Wu Ming was her synchronized partner. And of course, with the younger athletes, they're always overshadowed, right, by the older athletes. So Wu Ming came out, and she was dealing with a lot of fear in reference to actually just what it was that they do, which is twisting, twirling, and jumping around in midair and landing into a very hard surface when traveling at those kinds of velocities. And so working with a lot of fear was the work that we were able to do with Wu Ming. And she had her best showing ever, and she won bronze. However, leave it to Guo Jingjing, who was just such an amazing woman, and once again, such a beautiful honor to get to work with this athlete. In their synchronized work, they really came out in style, and not only did Guo Jingjing boast a personal gold in these Olympics, she also boasted synchronized gold. And so absolutely a lot of the work that we did with the device surrounding emotional release was imperative to their success. We saw this consistently. And then we had, like with men's diving, a very similar story. With the women's team, they had the understudies, Chen Ru, and Chen Ru was the next generation, an unbelievable competitor. We got to do 10 therapeutic sessions working with every member of the diving team. And it's amazing, but you'll keep noticing the people that we work with, it seemed almost very synonymous. Skio plus athlete equal gold, right? So Chen Ru gold. Wang Xin, this was the other, also a synchronized pair. Wang Xin came out and bronze. Working with the two of them, synchronized gold. Different levels. I guess the first pair of women were jumping from a higher, diving from the higher meters, and these two were lower. But look at that, eh? Just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so from diving, we were then brought into weightlifting. And weightlifting was very, very cool because, once again, in China, their expectations were for the women to perform a lot more than for the men to perform. So we were actually working with the women's weightlifting champion. Yes. Chen Yan. And she was wonderful. Chen Yan presented with insomnia from overtraining and a lot of emotional stress coming into the games. In China, what was interesting was we discovered that regardless of an athlete's performance, their ability to compete was not dictated by their performance. Their ability to compete was dictated by politics in a country like China. So Chen Yan had a lot of stress coming into the games because she didn't know whether or not she would even be able to compete in the games, even though she had just won the Worlds and was number one. Working with Chen Yan, you eat what? We were really able to understand a lot of what was happening with her. So through the test matrix, in our first test in the bank, you can see the big smile on my face because I was in utter disbelief. You eat what? Insulin shock, sugar regulation, pancreas was showing up all over the matrix. So I had to ask her, and I mean, weightlifters, they eat a lot of food. They put in a lot of fuel in order to be able to build their bodies that way. She was eating 8 kilograms of watermelon every day. And when I asked the coach and the team doctor why they would allow her to eat 8 kilograms of watermelon each day, they said because she likes it. So her chronic fatigue, the byproduct of her insomnia, we found rooted in blood sugar instability. And so just from even being able to confer with her and offer dietary changes, both to her and her coach, it really changed her experience. The chronic fatigue, just once she stopped putting in all those sugars, the chronic fatigue subsided. We were able to do 5 sessions with her working in therapy. I would like to have done more because work that I'll discuss a little later in the presentation would have absolutely been very, very interesting to have tried working with Chen Yan. But once again, she changed her diet, she came out and she performed as expected, and she won gold. Women's judo. Women's judo was very interesting because this was by far the sweetest, nicest athlete we ever worked with. Her name was Tong Wen, and she was just nice. Very welcoming of the device. She had a soft tissue injury in her ankle that we worked with. We were able to do 10 sessions working with her, and by the end of 10 sessions, we had a complete release of symptoms. And she came out and she dominated. That girl in the slide, I hazed it out to give it the memory effect. Memories, right? But that girl is in mid-air, the one that she is manhandling and throwing around there.
Oh, yeah.
In mid-air, Tong Wen came out and just dominated. And victory. And look at that face, eh? Just wonderful. We were then able to work with the women's swim team, and this is where the work really took on a different face. Working with endurance-based athletes, such as swimming. Once again, swimming is obviously a feature event in the Summer Olympics, and working with these athletes, they were trained so hard and pushed so hard that when we started working with them, we had the experiences that we had were contraindications. Not contraindications in that there was any problem or we caused any healing crisis or anything of that sort. That's not the contraindication. What we found was when we worked these athletes in stress reduction that close, and of course when we started with the women's swim team, we were about 6 weeks away from the games. And as an athlete is being trained for major world competition at the national level, their coaches are training to peak them. They're increasing the workload of training in every day in order to bring the athlete up to that peak point where they're supposed to peak at competition. So working with swimming, every time we would work to support them in stress reduction and release, what was happening was exactly what we would expect, was the athlete was coming off the device in their daisy haze, you know, coming off like Jello, ready to sleep for a week. Think about it when you're being pushed, when you're running really, really hard, right? You're working hours and hours and hours, and you've been doing so for a long period of time. When you're going all out, and then you take that first 5-minute cat nap, you tend to be screwed. Right? That's where you hit the wall and you feel how tired you and the body are. And that's what was happening when we did the first 3 sessions with women's swimming. The athletes were coming off in great moods, they were very relaxed, they were very happy, they wanted to sleep, and the coaches were looking at us as though this is not what we're looking for in our partnership with you as the athletes. And that there again led me into a Nelsonian thinking, whereby I considered, okay, what would happen if we used the device in a more focused way? And because we were desperate to get results with these athletes, you know, this team was very, very important, and everything we did was being watched. Because we were desperate to get results, we had to try something new. At first, we had to get past the coach. And the coach enabled us to test every woman on the women's swim team. And we worked with Liu Zijie in therapy. We also worked with Zhao Yu Yang. Try this. Because we were at a loss with the initial 3 therapeutic sessions that we had tried, because we were at a loss for how to boast the results that the coaches were looking for, I in fact remember getting on the phone and calling Bill and asking Bill what his thoughts were about the idea of testosterone stimulation through the device. And from that conversation in the 4th session, we set forth a 10-session protocol, a 10-session model, looking at the stimulation of testosterone, growth hormone, and all the IG markers. Now, what we saw in pulsing testosterone stimulation, what was beautiful was that there was a beautiful baseline. All of the athletes were being dope tested coming into the Olympics. Plus, they had seen their testosterone levels for 6 months coming up to the games. So they've been able to monitor where testosterone and growth hormone were at in the athletes. And of course, that close to games, what we saw consistently were that their levels were low due to the overtraining. And so we started by pulsing a 10-minute stimulation. We ran 10-minute stimulations for 3 sessions. We were able to work with these girls for about 20 sessions, over 20 days. 20 sessions over 20 days. Every day pulsing testosterone, growth hormone, and the IGs. Cortisol decreased. And every day increasing the therapy duration to the end whereby we were pulsing testosterone, growth hormone stim for up to about 30 minutes. Now what we saw was every one of the girls that we ran this program with was breaking their competition bests in practice. A national athlete of this caliber has two scores. They have their practice score and their competition. Their competition score is always faster than their practice score because the adrenaline of competition, right? They were all breaking their competition bests in practice. We were also hearing through the doctors that they were able to measure quantitative increases in blood. And then, of course, the fear of doping, of setting off doping markers, was the next area and issue of stress. It was explained to me by the head of sport medicine in China that when there's been a steroid stimulant, it changes the shape of the red blood cell from being round or oval to square. And that is how they're able to detect doping. But of course, what we were stimulating, we weren't teleporting testosterone and growth hormone into their bodies. We were stimulating their bodies to produce. And hence, what increased was natural production. Subsequently, there were no doping markers set off. Now, in the beginning, when we worked with these athletes, as most Chinese athletes, they were very comprised, very refined, very emotionally conservative. By the end of the month, by the end of a 20-day cycle whereby we were doing this, what we saw in the athletes was what you would expect. Their attitudes changed. They became far more aggressive. They were complaining of menstrual cramping when having menstruation, but they were also fast. In fact, they were so fast that they won gold. Zhao Luyang won gold in women's butterfly. Liu Zijie won gold. And the team, the women's team, every one of those girls we worked with running the testosterone stimulation, they also won gold. Now, it was really, really nice. Has anybody in the room ever been to China? Raise your hand. So the food kind of sucks, eh? Oh yeah, it was horrible. The food was just horrible. So I got a call years before my partner, Roger Lessard, and if you don't know who Roger is, Roger by far has been one of the most important and colorful people in our business and industry. Roger is probably responsible for being the most successful marketer of the skio technology in the world, and we love him for it. Anyways, Roger and I, years before, had gone to Dubai and worked with the crown families of Dubai, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. We were hooking up camels at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the desert. We were doing crazy stuff. And subsequently since, the Sheikh had bought 6 devices to manage different programs within his kingdom. A kingdom. Hanging out with a guy who has a kingdom, right? Very crazy. One of the coolest things that ever happened with the work with Sheikh Saeed was 6 devices running different aspects of what's happening in his experience. There was easily about $300 million in horse stock that he had, race horses, Arabians, and so on, and easily about $250,000 worth, or $1 million, sorry, worth of racing camels. Racing camels. And the racing camels were by far more important to the sheikhs than the horses. The racing camels, very interesting. When I got to Dubai, I would never have believed this, but the racing camels are actually raced by robot jockeys. And it was explained to me that Dubai, or the UAE, got into big trouble internationally because they were bringing in jockeys from Pakistan and Sudan, and when they were young and light, they were useful. When they got old and their weight increased, they were no longer of use, and there were issues of their ethical treatment. So as a result of this, they were no longer able to bring in the jockeys for the camel racing, and they had to go to robots, which was very interesting. But working with the Sheikh, one of the things which we did, which was very, very exciting with his programs, was that working with his horses, he had a program where they were ultimately fertilizing or putting a fertilized egg into a surrogate. And so they were taking a purebred Arabian fertilized egg and inserting it into a Clydesdale surrogate. The reason was, at the last 2 weeks of gestation for an Arabian horse, because the horse is so small, they were unable to eat in the last 2 weeks, and hence the mother and the foal would lose, they would estimate, about 30 pounds of potential. Putting them into the Clydesdale, the idea was the Clydesdale would be able to filter in more nutrition into the horse, and I know it's amazing, eh? Their success rate was 3%. Before they found the device. After they found the device and started implementing it in conjunction with their program, their success rate went up to 65% on this program. Subsequently, the Sheikh bought over 6 devices that they work with in different facets of his kingdom. Anyways, we were really, really lucky to see Sheikh Saeed in Beijing. He's also a world-renowned athlete. He's a professional skeet shooter, and he was actually in Beijing to compete. The beautiful thing was, I got to totally hang out with him again, which was awesome, and the food was the best food I had the entire time I was there. Now, every athlete that came into Beijing had to stay in the Olympic Village, except Sheikh Saeed. Sheikh Saeed had this beautiful villa about 10 minutes away from the Olympic Village that was built for him to show up for that 1 week. Oh yeah, it's absurd being around these guys. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. When we traveled once in his jet, it was lined with gold, because gold reflects radiation. Very progressive. Anyways, we were able to both do some work with him during the games. I know, it's unfathomable. $8 billion net worth public. Crazy. So we got to hang out with him. We got to eat good food for the first time in our experience in China over that 4 months. And we got to work with his entire entourage. Rabi is his right hand. And that was, you gotta love the professional athletes brought forth by the United Arab Emirates. That was the team. Yeah, and Sheikh Saeed came out and he had a good showing at the Olympics. Before this, he had just placed gold in the Asian Games. And we didn't get to do a lot of work, but we definitely did a lot of eating. It was fantastic. So we got to see Sheikh Saeed out there, which was great. And then this was the highlight of working with the Olympics. We were given the women's tennis team, and this is the team in which I was most excited to work with. because these, yes.
I just want to ask a question about the testosterone that you were doing every day for
Every day.
For 20 days.
Every day for 20 days.
Because I thought that really it's supposed to be about 3 days between treatments.
3 days between, a lot of those are contraindications that I would, generally pass over to Bill. However, what I would say is this, some of those, certainly things I'm teaching now in my lectures in North America, are that a lot of those old ideas of only test every 3 days, or only hook somebody up every 3 days at max, are in fact wrong. Those were ideas which were brought forth before Professor Nelson and his brilliance. Ego stroke. Before Professor Nelson and his brilliance brought us the SKIO. And in the SKIO, we moved into a very huge advancements in autofocus emphasis. And the device was now able to deliver to the athlete, or to the client, what was their needs, and be able to increase or decrease power based on the person's needs. And what, the biggest thing I've learned in working in China, because we were able to work in a different way than typically has ever been done before. One of the things I learned was what we're doing is there's so many things that we're doing, and it's so layered and structured, but really what we're doing, at least legally, is biofeedback. Biofeedback is training. So think about it this way. You get a brand new puppy. You train the puppy every day. You do your obedience training with the puppy. You tell the puppy to come, sit, heel, lay down. And if you work with him every day, puppy trains up quickly and works well. Right? If you work with that dog sporadically, you end up with a dog that's not working nearly as well or able to realize his peak potentials in that training. What we're doing is training. The more we work with an athlete consistently and focused, or the more we work with a client, consistently and focused, the better our results, always. And this was something we absolutely learned in China. Because we had the ability to work with people 20, 30, 40 days in a row on the device, trying to boast results quickly.
Did you worry about anything about stopping?
I worried about everything.
Stopping the testosterone that you had.
Well, we worked with these girls up to and through the games. Through the games. And so working with the testosterone growth hormone, everything was on a gradual increase as we attempted to match it to the intensity of their training. And so that we were working to max out the stimulation of the testosterone growth hormone. We were looking to max out that potential. We were creating, so there had never been anything that had ever been approached in this type of a way that I was aware of anyways. So we were creating in the moment. And the idea was, as they're working to peak the athlete, we should be working to peak the stimulation of testosterone growth hormone. So that's very much something we took into consideration.
Did they get weaned off of it as well?
Oh, well, no. And so the testosterone growth hormone thing was probably the most important work we did, because initially we did this at the national level, working with the national athletes. And at the provincial level, because we had to, once again, our backs were up against the wall and we had to boast results, we got back into the testosterone growth hormone stimulation because we knew we could find a quantitative measure, something that could be measured to support. So we started working with the rowing team and we implemented a 30-day program. This had nothing to do with competition, but a 30-day program working with the training of those athletes and measuring their testosterone growth hormone levels. We ran the exact same protocol, a gradual increase over a 30-day period with sessions every day. Every one of the athletes at the provincial level maxed their potentials in what the previous baseline testing had showed, maxed their potentials in the production of testosterone growth hormone and red blood cell activity. So the problem once again was now we were doing it at the provincial level, and the province owned the research. So once again, although we saw on paper the increases, they would not release that data to us. Our next step in sports in China, when we commence in China again, our next step is to go into the National Sport Hospital to pay for our own study, funny enough with the women's swim team because they love us, looking at testosterone growth hormone stimulation and owning the data. Because if we own this data, then I hate to coin the term digital doping, but literally in this case what we have is digital undetectable doping. And if we boast that data, that's 10,000 devices easily to every team within the province that is endurance or strength-based, which is about 90% of them. That'll be 10,000 devices in 1 year easily. Every team has a team doctor. Every team has a team chiropractor. Every team will have a skio. So yes, I'm not done yet. Okay, women's tennis. This one I was excited about because these athletes were playing Wimbledon. They were playing the US Open, the French Open. They were on the international team. I mean, really, let me ask you guys this. Who won the Worlds in swimming about 2 months ago? Anybody know? No? Who won the French Open? Women, what female player won the French Open? Other than Bill, who won? Lena. Right? Lena. Exactly. Working with these athletes was exciting because they were known at the national level. Plus, I was better able to connect to them because having traveled and worked internationally, they were very, very different than the majority of the athletes who had never been out of China other than to compete. So with the women's tennis team, the Minister of Sport China, who's the gentleman in the middle, came out before they would even let us touch and did the introduction. So we were introduced to the team by the head of Sport China. The woman to his right is Sun Jingfeng. Sun Jingfeng is a national hero in China. In the late 60s, she outspoke against the Japanese. And she was a part of an Olympic volleyball team in the late 60s that actually won gold, putting China for the first time on the world circuit, where she was publicized nationally, speaking out against the Japanese occupation of China during the war. And so in the country, this woman was loved and coveted. You can see her in this picture. They were going crazy coming into the Olympics. The stress level the ministers were dealing with was absolutely absurd. The pressure was high. So working with her team, we were invited to come out and work with these athletes, which was my biggest honor. And we literally were driving 200 miles per hour from Beijing. In the morning, we worked with the women's swim team. In the afternoon, they literally shut down a highway. They shut down a highway during the time that we were traveling so that we could get where we needed to be. It was 2 hours away and we were getting there in an hour. And they shut down the highway for us to do this. So that's how important they began to deem the intervention of the skio. 200 miles, it was scary. This was the first time a foreigner had ever stepped on to the professional tennis training base. That's the facility. That was the view from my window. It was awesome. So, working with the team, we worked with every one of the girls on the women's team. We worked with Yenze, we worked with Zhang Jie. These two were really exciting to work with. Yenze had neck and shoulder pain. She also had some major emotional stress coming into the games as she was really looking to perform. We developed an amazing relationship and became really, really good friends. And there were issues in her compatibility with her partner. We were able to run 12 sessions applying the biorhythm compatibility program to work with the athletes in order to better their relationship, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in order to be able to compete better. And both of the girls came out and just played unbelievably. And their coach described their performance after we started working with them, releasing the emotional stress. Their coach described their performance as rejuvenating. And the girls came out and they fought furiously. Now remember, the Chinese women are typically body type much smaller than those that they would be competing against. And the girls came out and they won bronze at a national event in tennis. This was huge. This was groundbreaking. From this team that they didn't expect would win. Now Sun Tian, working with this athlete was interesting because she was such an amazing athlete, such an amazing composed player. However, she was coming into the end of her career. She wasn't so interested in competing again at this Olympics, as she had won gold with her partner in Athens. Working with her, what we saw with tennis was lots of neck and shoulder pain problems. What we found as an amazing tool for resolution was working with the TMJ release panel, the foci panel. Now, a wonderful thing about the TMJ foci panel that I was able to learn from Bill during that period of time was that after you've initially scanned and treated foci, and treated all the foci within the TMJ panel, you can scan again. And when you scan again, you go to a different layer. And in fact, you keep scanning and releasing the foci until none appears after the scan total. When we applied the TMJ work in conjunction with the spinal work, as well as the craniosacral, consistently, each one of the women's tennis players had release of pain from the motion of serving, which was important because they were all serving about 10 miles an hour faster after we released the pain. It was fantastic to see. So Sun Tian wasn't very interested in competing. She had accomplished what she set out to. She won in Athens in 2004, which was an amazing feat for Chinese women on the world circuit. So China was really coming up. And ultimately she knew this was to be her last show and wasn't very interested at all. At the same time, Peng Shui, who's now still on the international circuit, Peng Shui was her partner, and she was a fierce young competitor. So these two just had a complete mismatch of energy. There was a total incompatibility. One athlete on their way out, the other athlete certainly on the up and coming. And regardless of what we did working with these girls, short of their personal release and the release of pain, whereby we saw amazing results, we couldn't really do any major work. For me, where it got really exciting and interesting was working with this particular player, working with Lina. Lina had not been performing for a year and a half coming into these games. A year and a half earlier, she had blown out her knee, I believe at the US Open. And because she was a national athlete in China, once again owned by the state, she was forced to have her knee surgery in China by the government for publicity. She wanted surgery in Germany, where all the other girls on the circuit went for their surgeries. She wanted surgery in Germany. They would not allow her. So for a year and a half since the surgery, the pain in the knee did not subside because there was an emotional component. So we were brought to work with Lina based on initially her pain and the lack of her emotional intensity in the game. Who you see there in the picture is the head coach of tennis, and behind him is a TCM, a Doctor of Chinese Medicine, who was brought in from Manchester United. He is the Doctor of Chinese Medicine for the Manchester United soccer team. He was paid over $250,000 to come in to work with Lina, particularly Lina, for the games, because China really wanted to get her functioning again. However, his work had accomplished virtually everything with her. because nothing was able to address the emotional component. And what we saw through the device were two very discernible emotional stress factors. One was the anger at the state, was the anger at China. Two is well depicted in our next slide. The second issue that we saw emotionally was her husband. Isn't that always a woman's issue? You know? Like really, right? Okay, so the second issue was her husband, whom was also her coach. See, everyone in this room gets it. The Chinese didn't seem to. What we saw was that her husband, being also her coach, that she was never getting off the court. She never had downtime.
Yeah.
And that was very easily discerned through the device. And because we were able to understand the nature of these emotional issues and bring them forward, we were able to address them. And amazing that they didn't figure this out on their own. But in this picture, what you see is, in fact, the husband moving out of the room. We discussed with the head coach, based on the information we discerned through the SKIO, we discussed with the head coach that he could either serve as her husband or as her coach in this capacity up until the games. But as both, it was not going to work. And so this was him moving out of the room. You can see the smile on her face. And you can see the relationship that we've built based on this. She was very, very happy to have her space restored and herself understood. Now, also with Lena, there was the issue of the knee pain, which there again in about 10 sessions we were able to offer her full release of symptoms. And she came out brand new. I mean, if you watch the Beijing Games, look at that face. There was an intensity that the coaches had not seen her with ever. She was a changed athlete. She came out and she was pain-free, and she was all over the court in those games. Now, what was interesting was the coaches and Sun Jingfang were all very, very stressed by the Olympics because happenstance B, she drew the #1 seat in tennis, a Russian woman, I forget her name. She drew the #1 seed for first round. Second round was Venus Williams, who was not the #1 seed at the time, but probably #2, right? So she drew #1 and #2 in the tournament right off the bat. She destroyed them both in straight sets. She came out as a completely different athlete. Pain-free and achieving her peak potential. Now, at the Olympics, Lena placed 4th. She didn't medal, but this was by far one of my biggest success story, the SKIO's biggest success story in working with the Beijing Olympics. Now, after these games, because of the dialogue that the SKIO enabled us to open up, and the feelings which were unconscious for her, however, festering and causing major toxicity in her performance, because the device was able to discern those feelings and bring up and enable a dialogue between the two of us, Lena started to consider a whole new concept, and that was she could go private. This had never happened with a professional athlete in China. For example, if anybody follows NBA basketball and you've seen Yao Ming, the only 7'5" basketball player in the world, Yao Ming is owned by the government. 50% of his proceeds goes directly, be it from advertising contracts or actual direct pay from the team, goes to China. Surgeries, politics, everything is discerned by the government of China. There are no other athletes in the world which have to deal with these kinds of stressors. With Lena, we were able to understand her anger based on the stress in the knee, based on not being able to have her surgery, based on not being able to choose their coaches, based on a whole bunch of variables. You know, the iron fist in the velvet glove of the Chinese rule, right? Lena had the courage, and this commenced the week after the Olympics, okay? Through the work that was done dialoguing emotionally with her through the SKIO, Lena had the courage to leave the Chinese national team and go private. And what was amazing was Sun Jingfeng, once again, we've already discussed her, she was the hero, right? Sun Jingfeng, outspoken against the British back when Chinese did not speak out. Sun Jingfeng supported her. She was the head of tennis. She supported her in the leaving of the team and promoted the idea to other athletes, professional athletes in China that would be playing on the international circuit. And this year, Lena was the first Chinese woman athlete to win a major Grand Slam event in the history of the sport. So that was pretty crazy and pretty exciting. And therein you can see the effect of skio at the level of national change. By enabling the dialogue, the release of emotional stress, you see national change happening in sports now, and it's due to the skio. So that's pretty amazing. In fact, we saw the impact of the skio in sports having the ability to affect national change through Lena's story. We profiled provincially and nationally 40% of all the athletes which we tested showed for heart rate instability and palpitation. We were able to profile, and this is where the skio was not just a unilateral tool working directly with an athlete. It enabled us to profile an entire sport program. And so at the end of sports, we were able to issue a report discussing the common stressors in sports in China. And we saw MSG toxicity through the device showing reoccurringly in China as a root cause of heart rate instability and insomnia. Because of the work done by the skio, national policy was set forward taking MSG off of all training bases in the country.
Wow.
MSG and any food preservative. And that's due to the ability for the skio to profile and work in so many multiple amazing ways. So we affected national change in that country in a very, very short period of time, which was just, an unbelievable experience. And I feel so very, very grateful. We're not even remotely close to done yet. I might be long-winded, but it's kind of cool. Anybody want to leave? With the device, I think through my presentation, and really you're seeing every athlete that we worked with in therapy, skio plus athlete equal gold. And I feel very, very blessed and grateful to have been a part of that. And so once again, a thank you goes out to Bill and everybody mentioned in that list, because we affected change in the world, in the world of the
This is the story of Novak Djokovic and the skio. See, in 2009, before he was using the skio, after retiring to Roger Federer in Monte Carlo and during the semifinals, Novak had a history of ailments that interfered severely with his play. Novak was sick and tired of being sick and tired. He was plagued by a hip injury while engaged in a match with Tommy Roberto. Novak called 2 timeouts, claiming both injury and exhaustion. His next opponent, Andy Roddick, said that Novak was too quick to call a trainer. Novak had a reputation for being injured and tired, and he proceeded to list all the ailments that might be tormenting him. In 2009, during the Australian Open, Novak retired against Roddick during a quarterfinal match, citing exhaustion, muscle cramps, soreness. He was sick and tired of being sick and tired. He had a sore shoulder that limited his serve. Sick and tired and with shoulder pain, Novak hired a private skio therapist, Dr. Igor. Igor started treating him with the skio to help his oxygen transport. The skio detected his gluten sensitivity. Desiree sent him some sport formula, and he responded well. He responded rapidly and went on a tear at the U.S. Open. And then after that, the Angel team worked hard and the Skio to fix his shoulder. He responded well, very well. Allergy work, breathing problems, muscle repair. The Skio boosted his VAR hope and his performance went up and up. Research has shown an increase of 5% in the body electric factors with the Skio that increase performance. Novak starts to win and win big. The Skio helped him. After just a few weeks on the Skio, it was a big difference. Novak became dominant. Stamina problems were a thing of the past. Coordination increased up 5%. Strength, 5% increase. Emotions became under control. Dr. Igor was working with him intimately every day on a day-to-day basis. Now, after the Skio treatments, after he became focused, Novak leads the Serbs to a Davis Cup win. The Skio was there to help all of them. Novak wins the Australian Open. Novak wins at Indian Wells, beating his archenemy Nadal. He wins at Miami, defeating Federer and Nadal. He wins at Madrid, beating Nadal on clay courts 5 times. Nadal wins at home in Serbia. He becomes focused, clear, stronger. He wins at Rome and Madrid. His mind, his emotions now more under control. His body tuned.
Showed early on why he's risen to the top of the rankings. And the Serb made the first breakthrough, winning the opening set after breaking Nadal for the first time. Nadal looked shaken. Uncharacteristic errors started to appear, and Djokovic was quick to pounce. Whatever the Spaniard threw at him, the new world number 1 was more than equal to the task. Nadal was being made to look ordinary. Djokovic took just half an hour to win the second set. Errors once again appeared, and Djokovic broke to lead 5-4. From there, he served out to take the title for the first time, and was quick to taste the victory. It's his 5th win in a row against Nadal. What a way to start your reign as the new world number 1. Bruce McKellar, Sky News.
I was born for, something that I always worked for, and now I got my chance and I used it.
The voice of a champion, no doubt about it. Monday means Novak Djokovic can and will officially be calling himself the number 1 player in men's tennis. The Serbian can also celebrate the fact he's just landed a first ever Wimbledon title after seeing off defending champion Rafa Nadal in Sunday's showpiece eye-catching finale at the All England Club just outside of London. Rafa starting to make some uncharacteristic errors as well, and Djokovic believes it's in the head. He knows at match point that this title is his for the taking. He seals it in 4, 6-4, 6-1, 1-6, 6-3. Novak Djokovic is the new Wimbledon champion, his first ever at the All England Club. A worthy winner as he celebrates a landmark career achievement. Truly phenomenal year for Novak. It continues in style. He's now 48-1 on the current year. This is by far his biggest success, though. The best day of his life, he called it, and his recent dominance over Rafa continuing too, with the Serbian star now having won all 5 meetings, would you believe, in finals this year with the young Mallorcan. This is Novak's second major of 2011 as well, having also won his second Australian Open crown at Melbourne back in January.
It's just amazing to be able to do that in 3 days' time. I mean, all the 20 years of work and coming back to the places where where I grew up and started playing tennis, and all comes back to me. But I'm living my dream, and this is something that I was born for, something that I always worked for, and now I got my chance and I used it.
I'd have to agree with you on that, Miles. I mean, Djokovic has been sensational, and we talked about the physical trainer doing the work, but also putting in the diet as well with being gluten-free. I think that's made a major benefit as well because he has more energy, he's putting more time in, he travels with a doctor. So this guy right now, he is doing everything to the maximum. There's not one thing he's leaving unturned.
You mentioned the gluten, something that emerged recently. He discovered his allergy to it, so he's had to change his diet.
Yeah, and you and I were scrambling to find out what gluten was all about, and in the very basic, just saps you of energy. Doesn't allow you to sort of absorb the minerals and the good things you need to operate at optimal efficiency. And that was always a problem with him, finishing long matches.
This is an Oriental warrior spot that Desiree taught him how to use.
Even more aggressive. Just stunning hitting from Djokovic. The last.
He uses this to beat Federer. And now the story of Li Na.
And what she can bring to this final today, Virginia.
Well, she has just, improved so much. There's so much to be said for the way she hits a tennis ball. She hits it so early. I mean, she's just about got enough spin to...
There's a 20-year history of the skio helping some of the finest athletes in the world.
So well. So it takes away the time from the opponent. Her serve has improved. She's a tremendous athlete. I mean, I think she's playing so well.
This is Virginia Wade commenting on Li Na's incredible increase in performance, along with Greg Brzezinski, former British #1.
A lot of those years were just not spent on the tennis court. So she's sort of re-energized too, and that final at the Australian Open, and then she said she was so happy, and then it was the Chinese New Year, so she was celebrating for a while. So she's only just sort of got herself back in peak condition this year.
Li Na was part of the skio 2008 Chinese Olympic study. She had difficulty with her menses, and she was going to retire. She was sick and tired of being sick and tired. She got on the skio. The menses problems, the menses disturbance vanished immediately. She performed well, and she beat Venus Williams in the Olympics. Her trainers got a QXCI and started using it in the Australian Open. An increase in her performance. Increased 5%, strength increased, coordination increased, stamina increased. Her aches and pains are removed. Her move quicker with the skio technology. It deals with injury repair.
She raced through the tiebreak to wrap up the title after 1 hour and 48 minutes.
She takes the French Open.
6-4, 7-6.
The skio helps Li Na win. Osmosis is increased in a slight electrical field. The skio makes a harmonious, auto-focused pulse that maximizes the effect, thereby maximizing osmosis and changing this all the time in an auto-focused way. All things depend on osmosis. When osmosis is increased, all things work better. 5% better. The skio has been shown in experiments and clinical studies to increase performance, decrease pain, decrease injury time, increase osmosis, and make an athlete feel a little bit better and have a little bit better performance. The future of sports medicine is energetic. The future is skio.
stressors in sports in China. And we saw MSG toxicity through the device showing reoccurringly in China as a root cause of heart rate instability and insomnia. Because of the work done by the SKIO, national policy was set forward taking MSG off of all training bases in the country. MSG and any food preservative. And that's due to the ability for the SKIO to profile any food preservative. And that's due to the ability for the SKIO to profile and work in so many multiple amazing ways. So we affected national change in that country in a very, very short period of time, which was just, an unbelievable experience. And I feel so very, very grateful. We're not even remotely close to done yet. I might be long-winded, but it's kind of cool. Anybody believe? Okay. With the device, and I think through my presentation, and really you're seeing every athlete that we work with in therapy, SKIO plus athlete equal gold. And I feel very, very blessed and grateful to have been a part of that. And so once again, a thank you goes out to Bill and everybody mentioned in that list, because we affected change in the world, in the work that we did. So that was Beijing 2008, the story never told. We have a lot more material to cover. We're going to talk about working with the government, with the hospitals, and things such as that. It's a lot more brief because the Olympics was clearly the feature. Consistent, focused work, and ultimately, ideally, okay, so the question was, when working with an athlete and dealing with a repetitive injury, right, due to function of sport, how is it that you're able to boast those types of results? Well, I'll tell you a couple things about that. First of all, where I knew we had achieved full-blown success in China was that we were offered the opportunity to work on Liu Shang. Liu Shang was the hurdles, he won hurdles in Athens in 2004. This guy was the highest profile athlete in China. 2 weeks before the games, because of our successes, we were invited to work with Liu Shang. Now, he had torn a ligament in his ankle. Okay, so there was a physical structural issue. In that particular capacity, we just chose not to do it at all. Because this is something that became very obvious in China. Our device certainly has the ability at times to boast what would seem very much like the magic wand experience, right? One session, amazing results. What's happened there by comparison to an athlete with a physical structural issue? We have facilitated a blockage when we've seen those types of clearings, those types of release of symptoms and experience. When there's a physical issue with an athlete, it is impractical and in essence stupid to think that if an athlete had, or a person was cut, you had a big cut on your arm, that you would go into the harness and within an hour of biofeedback training that the cut would be completely gone. That is absurd. Well, it's the same thing happening internally, obviously, right? So in that situation, working with Liu Shang, because he was so high profile, we didn't want to touch it. Now, however, back to it, working in repetition with athletes, what we saw, and this work would not be able to be supported properly if you were close to major competition. What we saw was, in order for us to support the athlete in healing and getting, consistent holding results, what we had to do was put them on training hiatus. So working with the team, working with the coaches, working with the teams, we had to take them off of training.
You had that influence.
Exactly, and we were able to grow that influence. Yes. We initially did not have that influence, but we were able to grow that influence whereby we could make the recommendation to the coach that this athlete needed 30 days of downtime. Yeah. Yes. All of my work in China tended to be actually, be it working in the hospitals, working with ministers in therapy, everything seemed to be, structured day to day, back to back. Because it was always in China, they are moving at 1 million miles an hour. Literally. I mean, the country is growing, expanding, and they are dominating the world in such a way at this point, and changing. I mean, the rapid rate of change in mindset, thinking, and the whole culture is changing at such a pace at this point that we had very limited time often to work with people, and we were, of course, in all of our work out there trying to promote integration of the skio into mainstream. And so it was important to quickly get on their boast and go, yes, it works, which is why our focus was within the power structure of the country, because if you get all the most powerful people in a country saying, wow, these people have the keys that unlock every door, right? Hence, that was our focus. Yes?
You said you did it in 45 minutes each person?
We never had an athlete on the device for longer than an hour. And there again, we applied a Nelsonian ideology with that. Because when we tried doing the North American style sessions, which we were used to, the hour and a half, 2 hour sessions, we found that the law of thermodynamics was certainly being engaged, whereby this athlete, under this stress burden, put on the device for that period of time, the athlete was crashing and moving into an exhaustive state. Yes. Predominantly, the majority of our focus, as we went through the presentation, the majority of our focus was emotional, was managing the stress of the emotions and pain release with the athletes up until the point where we moved into the testosterone growth hormone stimulation. The majority of that work done through the matrix and done through the sport panel. See, at this point, especially with that type of work, I've certainly become a minimalist in reference to the device. And I always thought Bill was a little crazy back in the day when I would hear about his minimalism and thinking, there are so many more resources, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But what I learned was if I didn't try to create that amazing quantum cocktail and look for the just exactly perfect recipe that was going to boast results, and I just used specific programs in a focused way. So I wasn't going to be bouncing all over the different screens I had, but just to work on spinal that day, or just to work the dental program and bring each tooth into rectification, or to come into the scalar program and set 30-minute lower chakra release. Anytime I used the device in a focused way, rather than trying to build that amazing quantum cocktail, we always saw our best results through the device. Yes?
I'm assuming that you didn't have any real time to do any kind of coaching talk work.
No, we were able to dialogue after we made our successes with the trampoline team. Coming into diving, they opened up the ability to dialogue with the athlete. And 我的中文非常好，现在但是没问题，我可以告诉他们。
So did you see a lot more effect then?
Absolutely. Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, certainly I got to develop these amazing personal relationships. So for my cause and effect, it was fantastic. I've got all these national athlete friends now. But oftentimes I found that the device was able to offer the release of the emotional stress which showed prevalent and do so in an unconscious way, whereby it was not of value to bring it to the athlete's conscious awareness that close to competition.
So you never gave any emotional remedies, like you mentioned in back?
We were not able to work with any remedies. Everything that you saw posted through my presentation today was all done solely through the device. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, even a supplement to, like, we brought a bunch of a supplement company from Canada, gave us a pile of stuff to give to the athletes and try to put in. Unless it's in the little black book of what is acceptable and what isn't in the Olympics, you have to go through a process of about 2 years and about $120,000 per product to license to be able to work with in sports. Because it's not just at the Chinese level that you have to clear those medications, it's at the national World Olympic level. Yes?
What about using skio needing to be disclosed, and do you have any information that might indicate that they might try to regulate this kind of...
There's nobody in the know about what it is that we did. Remember at the beginning of the slide, at the beginning of my presentation today.
The only ones who know this now.
Well, my sense of it is this. In sports, what I learned was that which they can get away with, they will. For example, hyperbaric oxygen therapy is not permitted in professional sports, national sports at that level. Yet in every one of the training rooms and the athletes' rooms, I would see these very cool, I totally want one, hyperbaric oxygen bags that looked like a big duffel bag that the athlete would go lay in, and it pressurized and gave them hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which there again was not legal in sports, but there's no measure for detection. And so I think that's in sports, as I said, my experience having walked away and seen the things that I've seen is that everyone will cheat if they can.
The first person that was really afraid was Lance Armstrong, who was on the device, but he's deathly afraid of them because the French just look for anything to try to take away those French, the Tour de France time.
But we still love the French.
But basically, so he was deathly afraid, and he did not want anybody to, say anything about that. So he gave cease and desist. He never actually openly said he wasn't on it, but he said he gave cease and desist for everybody to stop talking about it because he's afraid of that D word.
Actually, I have a picture of him on it.
Yeah, exactly. Euronews had a shot of him. He was in the Arctic. The Euronews came to his trailer during the last Tour de France that he won, and he opened the door and he had the machine on him. And they said, "What is this?" And they said, "Biofeedback," when he shut the door.
Before I even continue in my presentation, the one thing that I would love to say is this. I am by no means an expert in sport medicine. The expert in sport medicine was the skio. The skio enabled me to work in the capacity that I did in sports, but this is not an Adam story. This is a skio story.
Some words about you, please.
Well, I'm just trying to...
I don't know you. I want to...
Well, I want to know you too.
Just a question. Did you work with NLP for emotional release, or did you work with biofeedback?
We worked with a lot of fluorescence therapy. We worked with the NLP panel. We worked with unconscious reactivity and associated the stressors which were showing prevalent. We applied a lot of gauge. We took gauge with us in protocol to China. Yes. TJ.
I'm going to ask this question when you start mentioning testosterone and hormone growth and stuff like that. So you're doing that every day. I mean, there must have been some...
Yeah, clearly I am.
Naturally for transitioning for transgenders, right? You're looking at, stimulating the testosterone all the time. So what were you noticing?
Whilst I can't speak to the transgender experience, I can speak to the testosterone growth hormone stimulation experience. And I guess the best person to ask that question would be to my right, over there, the beautiful lady in pink. What I would say, or talk to Gage.
I'm sorry.
TJ's question was, I guess, when working with someone transgendered or coming into transgender, how would you look at applying hormonal stimulation in that case to support the transformation that the person's going through?
The electrical stimulation will increase.
Well, the fact of the matter is this. We saw quantitative increase in potentials through pulsing. Okay, right when you start pulsing, testosterone growth hormone, it initially says to you, and he put this in, I would assume for good reason, warning this can be dangerous to homeostasis. It was dangerous to homeostasis, absolutely. The girls were bitchy. Initially I wasn't allowed to actually deal with the girl, Testy, thank you, Testy, my bad. Initially I wasn't allowed to go anywhere near the girls' dormitory, and of course, anyone who knows me, I wanted to get at the girls' dormitory. And the girls, really my motivation was that the girls were uncomfortable in the room that they had us in because they were also doing the urine dope testing in that room, so people were coming in and out. It wasn't a relaxing environment for the girls to work with. This was the women's swim team. However, once we began the testosterone growth hormone stimulation, the personalities changed, and when the girls didn't get what they wanted, they were throwing things. Literally. So we saw that there were emotional changes. We saw that there were symptoms of things like menstrual cramping, etc. And I think there may have even been a little bit of hair growth.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Did you even see that?
I think after the end of 30 days, we did start to see that there was some hair growth in some. So once again, this was not, this was not necessarily geared towards the overall well-being and health of the athlete. Now, granted, we were doing this to increase their peak potentials. You're never going to exceed that which the body has the range of production. Okay. And if this work was done and applied in a more balanced way than what we were doing coming into the Olympics, then certainly you would have the ability to stimulate and increase the body's potential in testosterone growth hormone production, enabling it to store and hold more oxygen in the red blood cells. You would have the ability to do that and I think balance it in a way whereby it was not causing stress in the homeostasis balance as long as you knew what to counterbalance it with and the durations in which to work. But because we were so close to performance and we were so on the spot with all the work that we were doing, this was about results and nobody cared. I mean, when we, even when I approached the Chinese, the coach and the team, and I said, look, this has the potential to disrupt their hormonal balance. Is that okay? And is it going to make them go faster? Yes, they will go faster. Go ahead. That was more or less the experience. And that, in sports, that is an ethical issue. It is absolutely an ethical issue, which was difficult for me. But one of the things I realized was this close to competition, what we were going to have the ability to do, this close to competition was either, for the sake of showboating, boast the results to move forward, or approach it from a holistic perspective and not get the results that they were looking for. So my belief is always, if I can't go in the front door, I'm going to try going in the back door. And if I get in the back door, I can make them realize that there is a front door and that it should be unlocked. And so that's how I had to ethically, within myself, morally and ethically, that's how I had to deal with and justify the work that I did up there in that capacity. In the future, the skio, when we profiled on a training base, 45% of heart rate instability and insomnia, the byproduct of MSG toxicity, setting forth national policy. When we profiled that, that's where we got to see, the effects of holism in sports. And next year, hopefully, you'll have Tara Geerdink out here. Tara kept going where we left off in provincial sports and continued to work with the Jiangsu province, really developing a holistic approach to working with the device. And it'll be really exciting to catch her lecture next year in regards to that, because she has different information to share in working with those athletes, able to apply a holistic approach, whereas my work was typically always showboating and the solidifying of the belief structure of the device. Yes.
But there's also going to be some ethical considerations there too. Because I've been talking with her a little bit as she's been working here, and there's other ethical considerations like some of the child labor.
There are a lot of things that we saw. There are definitely a lot of things we saw. Like in China, on a training base, very often you saw 6, 7-year-old children taken out of their house and brought to a training base. And on the training bases, they literally live there, work there, eat, breathe, sleep, and train. And China takes them from 6 or 7 and brings them all the way through. And one of the most horrible things we saw consistently was the overtraining and the lack of adequate nutritional understanding and knowledge and holistic understanding and knowledge. And so many athletes did we see where they did not come close, regardless of the $200,000 investment over a period of time that was made by China into that athlete. They were overtraining and burning through so many of their potential gold medalists because of a lack of a holistic approach. And that's where the device is going to change sport medicine China. And it will. It will. It's on its way. It's made its inroads. It has its beliefs solidified. So at this point, the next step is moving into holism. And we've had the ability to make effect. We've seen MSG out. We've seen raw foods in. We've seen a lot of the staple understandings that we're able to discern through this technology implemented in a very progressive and fast way. So I have nothing but confidence that the device's future in China, in sports, rests in a holistic capacity where it serves as the proper training of athletes, whereby they can really realize their potentials, which presently is not happening in the country. So it certainly has the capacity in the future to do amazing things. Yes?
You could also offer to dehormonize after a match.
You absolutely could. I mean, our work was done. We had spent all of our budget money. We had to go. But absolutely, if things were done properly, which they have the potential to be in the future, absolutely you could offer a balancing supportive after the games to restore and reestablish a better homeostasis. Yes. All right. So let me move on. Yes.
When you did the testing, which facility did you use?
Everything was matrix.
Matrix, not the athlete's facility testing.
We absolutely set a professional athlete into the device as a professional athlete, but otherwise demographics were never used, and we did set forth that the athlete we did tell the device that there was an athlete, but otherwise we used no demographic input, based on a conversation I had with Bill, because it was all about the integrity of that data, and with that integrity we wanted to ensure that there were no bias. So hence there was no info. All right, moving on, because there's still some cool stuff to cover. All right, China and the SFDA. China and the SFDA. The SFDA is the Chinese version of the FDA. Okay? Now, when we had first gotten to China, I explained at the beginning of my lecture that Victor, my partner, was a very connected man. So we had expected that we would be able to facilitate our SFDA licensing, which would typically take most companies 8 years. We'd expected that we could facilitate it through our connections within about 3 months. 3 days after we arrived to China, because after the Olympics we went there to implement a contract for the distribution of 20,000 skios, which was negotiated by my partner for the exclusive distribution rights for Skio China. So we'd expected we would get our licensing in order to be able to sell in the country through in a matter of months. 3 days after we arrived in the country, the minister of the SFDA was executed by China, and the vice minister was put into jail for life for bribery. For bribery. So they accepted bribes for a medication which caused the death of 18 children in northern China. Hence, they executed the minister and they put the vice minister in jail. So the SFDA came to a grinding halt. Subsequently, there was not going to be a 3-month process any longer. We were going to have to go through process. Now, what was exciting about this was it implemented new legislation which made the SFDA probably the most stringent licensing body in the world. So this then led to having to test the device in really profound ways. The first thing that they did in testing was they wanted to, and of course my experience was, oh shit. Excuse me for being that blunt, but my experience was, oh shit. Don't look behind the curtain. The Wizard of Oz is not there. That was my experience. I was worried that the device would not stand up to linear testing. The first thing they wanted to measure was that it could produce the wave output that the Skio is working box says. So they tested its wave output, and they did so, which took us a little while because nobody was helping us. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, say no more. We had to figure out how to be able to turn off all of the overlay in a waveform in order to be able to see that it could absolutely produce a singular wave, that it could produce a triangle wave, that it could produce a saw wave, that it could produce these waveforms and do it consistently. So that was initially a very, very scary thing for us. And certainly in the SFDA testing center in Tianjin, China, they tested its wave output and it absolutely was able to produce every waveform that it said it could. But the next test, and this one is where Gage and I hope in the future, are going to be working to try to duplicate what it was that they did for this testing in compliance. The next thing that they tested and that they did at the SFDA was test the sensitivity of the device. How sensitive a change could it detect in the client, in the host? And this is important work because the idea of evoked potential is an idea which has been challenged and is a somewhat contraindication in North America due to the old neurofeedback studies done in the 80s where they were hooking up a stimulation directly to a nerve, and imagine there were contraindications. Subsequently, evoked potential has been associated to those neurofeedback studies, and subsequently we are unable to really coin that term and that phrase and that licensing in a healthy, proper way in conjunction with what we do. But I believe it to be the perfect terminology for what we do. Now, they were testing how sensitive a change it could detect. So what they did was they had a frequency stimulator over here. They had a conductive dummy, like a crash dummy, a conductive dummy. We hooked up the straps to the conductive dummy, and we used the oscilloscope function within the device that most of you probably don't know is there. But we used the oscilloscope function in the device in order to measure what subtlety it could detect. This is where we totally changed everything in device, in the understanding of the device capabilities in China. And I got on the phone and I called Bill, just blown away. The device tested to be able to register a change at 200 millionth of a volt. 200 millionth of a volt, it says on this piece of paper that you're looking at, it was able to detect a change. Now, for those of you that aren't engineers, this may not make sense, but I had always understood that the box kind of worked like a MIDI box. You remember back in the 80s, keyboards could suddenly sound like guitars? That was because they were able to interface an analog signal into a digital signal. I had always assumed that it was an analog signal coming out from the box into the client, back into the box. The box was converting the analog signal into digital, and that it was a digital to analog converter, in essence. But it could not boast sensitivity of 200 millionth of a volt as an analog to digital converter. There's no way it could be that sensitive. So I got on the phone and I called Bill and I said, "Hey Bill, what the hell's going on? Because we absolutely just shook everything up in this testing center. The ground has shaken. What is going on here?" He said, "Oh, well, quite simply, I'm getting a digital signal from the body." Do you know what that means? That means you're all computer programs. That's in essence exactly what that means. So 200 millionth of a volt. Now, in evoked potential, in our certification and our licensing worldwide, one of the biggest things is that they don't consider a stimulation of 4 volts to be substantial, significant to the body, of no great significance, right? Well, in evoked potential, and the 4 volt range being nothing of significance, in the 4 volt, 0 to 4 volt potential, if we're able to measure and detect a change at 200 millionth of a volt, then that's a pretty broad range, 0 to 4 volts. And that's where the device really stood up in the testing. And the SFDA was floored. There were gentlemen next to us that were testing a biofeedback technology of their own, and they saw our testing. They said, "Oh my God, you are sensitive to 200 million of a volt. How is that possible? How much is the device selling for in China? We think it should sell for $1 million. Literally, they expected that the price of the device would be at least $1 million for the sensitivity that it was boasting, because there is nothing else available in the world, I don't care what diagnostic device you're using or promoting, that will boast that sensitivity. 200 millionth of a volt. Thank you very much, Professor Nelson.
System that can interface digital to digital.
That's what I said.
The digital body to the digital computer.
We're computer programs. Yeah. I know, you're insane.
And I can't patent it, because if I patent it, I'd have to release the secret.
Right.
Don't do that.
I don't.
Skio, and that was another thing. In China, one of the big fears was copying the device. The beauty is, there is not a brilliant mind such as that one on the planet whereby it can be copied, thank God. Okay, Skio and the CPC. So every single member, many of you will have no idea who you're looking at, but every single member in that photo, less one, we worked on in therapy and in testing. Working with the government, I've been asked not to speak too in depth in its regards, plus I've been given my 5-minute warning. So what I'll say about it is this. When we have tested every minister and vice minister in Chinese central government. We have talked about development of contracts at this point whereby each ministry, the upper ministry, only dealing with vice ministers and ministers, but for the stress level that these guys have on a daily basis, we have negotiated and are still in negotiations for the implementation of devices into each element of ministry. Now, one of the great things that we saw, each one of these guys was an insomniac, like 85-90% all insomniacs. Just to be a member of the CPC at that level, they had to have an IQ over 200. So they're all brilliant, right? And none of them can discuss the stress that they're experiencing with anyone, including their wives. There is no release for these guys. Where the device shone was in its ability, once again, be it sports or working with the government, very similar peak potential type people, where the device really made its major headway with these guys was in its ability to understand them emotionally and not discuss the nature of that which we saw and be able to clear out that emotional stress without dialogue or conversation. And the CPC government and agenda, clearly very secret, well protected through the likes of this intervention, enabling them to have solution in situations where there is otherwise none. These guys can't talk to anybody about what they do. And the device was able to understand those things without the details and release them without the conversation. And that was huge. It was huge. And that implemented us into speaking with them. This particular minister I am able to speak of, Zhang Jingwei we got to work with, and he was the Minister of Commercialism. And working with Zhang Jingwei, one of the beautiful things that happened was we were able, through the device, to diagnose a heart condition that his physicians had missed. These guys get 2 annual checkups at the best hospitals in the country. But of course, in an annual typical checkup, they don't do a Doppler. So working with Zhang Jingwei, every time he was on the device, we saw cardiac stress, cardiac stress, cardiac distress. Every time I would work with him in therapy to try to work with the heart, he would turn bright red. So it was from multiple testing as well as watching the reactions in therapy that I was confidently able to say to him, you need to get your butt to the hospital and be tested. Sure enough, he went to the hospital, he was tested, he had 98% blockage in 3 arteries. He was on the cusp of a major heart attack. The man loves us now, because the device pointed out something that ultimately, in his opinion and mine, saved his life. Li Guoping, we were really, really lucky. We worked with him. He got us into sports as per the minister. You'll notice he's laid up in bed there. This is where we were really lucky. His misfortune, our good fortune, right? During the Olympics, he was skiing in Beijing at the indoor ski hill. He ripped his ACL, his MCL, and his PCL, and subsequently he ended up in his own hospital bed, in his own hospital, where he was supposed to be traveling the country, and we would have had very limited access because he was right across the hall. This enabled us to really move forward beautifully in sports and the future of sports, so relationships were well solidified. Plus, that injury, which typically in China is said to be a 100-day injury, he was up walking and able to do the Olympic ceremony walk within 3 weeks without a cane. All the pictures, yeah, thanks. All the pictures here are ministers, vice ministers, some of the most important people in the country. The Development Bank of China, we ran a $6 million contract for 2 years. $6 million contract for 2 years with the Development Bank, testing every one of their employees. We had to look at starting this contract during a very stressful period of time in the Development Bank history. They had gone from being a national bank to being a private bank. All of their employees were losing their government power, their government titles, but subsequently they were supposed to be reimbursed and they were supposed to make 3 times the amount of money. But because it was the first year of the economic crisis, the bank didn't want to pay 3 times the amount of the salary, and they wanted to privatize that year without doing it. So what they did was they said, I'm sorry to their employees, we aren't going to be able to pay you your 3 times salary this year, but we are giving you this amazing biofeedback program. So right off the bat, we were very loved. Not, right? But very, very quickly, we began to be known as the crystal ball people. Because you had magic, right? We tested every member of the National Bank each year, and the testing that was done was all parallel to the physicals done in the hospital as well. At a bank in China, your medical clinic, your pharmacy, your Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and your hair can all be cut right and taken care of right in the bank so that you never leave and you keep working, right? So working with the device there, we tested every one of their people. We were able to profile that same issue in MSG toxicity. They were all eating in the same place. So once again, the device is able to profile a large demographic and bring about change, whereby at the national level, they forced all of the cafeterias within their facilities to remove the MSG and all the food preservatives from the food. Subsequently, there was an 85% decline in all insomnia and neck pain. Brilliant, eh? So we were brought in during stressful times. We issued each year 3,200 diagnostic tests. I'm shutting it down right away. So I'd just like to give props to the team. Top left, we have Tara, we have Laura, we have Eric, Kente, Yin Lin, and Rodney Bali, who I couldn't find a picture of. We brought all these guys out to come and work with us to run this form of testing. Now with testing, the problem with our device was it never had a really fantastic reporting function to be able to serve in that capacity, and he just touched that point. I was very worried about that delivery. We had also no Chinese software. So imagine training Chinese practitioners to use English software that don't speak English. I mean, the thing looks like Chinese on its own anyways when you're first starting out, right? Exactly. So, I mean, that was an issue. What we had to do was actually translate the matrix ourselves and design a reporting function that would enable us to extract the results from a test and put it into a professional report which could be issued to the client. I gave each one of you an example of that report in which we issued on your desk called the Quantum Clarity Report. I've since changed and redeveloped that software so that it can be used by the rest of us. But the key to corporate contracts, what we discovered, was that therapy was not possible in a corporate model. In a corporate model, therapy was not sustainable, because there were too many people that you had to work with and they couldn't afford the time with the employees. What was sustainable was a testing model in conjunction with a franchise model. We could bring everybody in, we could test them, in essence be paid to advertise how amazing our services were, and then facilitate them for therapy into our franchise centers. But what we saw was at the corporate level, we could absolutely run a sustainable program. 2 minutes. A good year. That year, the development bank, after the changes set forth, they made the most money they ever made as a private bank in their first year, which was fantastic, because I feel we were a part of that. White-faced. So there were crazy people coming into the bank all the time. I'm working in the National Bank, and who the hell am I? So this guy, Robert Zolik, I watched him come into the bank once, and this is the head of the IMF. I didn't know who the heck he was when I was talking to him in the bank. He comes into the bank secretly, quietly, no big entourage, and he goes up to speak with Chen Yuan, the president of the bank. He comes back down white-faced, and he says, I said, well, we were just casually talking. I had no idea who he was. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, I work with the World Bank, and they just showed me upstairs that they have more money than we do. And his face was just white, because he obviously went in to strong-arm them, and he came out just completely floored, which was crazy to see. This guy, I was introduced to this day when he came in. Everybody knows who that is? Yeah, that's Hugo Chavez. He's a hell of a lot shorter than I thought. But anyways, he came into the bank, and when he came in, we were introduced by Chen Yuan, by the minister of the bank. He said, this is our healing expert from Canada with a device from Budapest. It works energetically and it fixed my sleeping problems. Hugo says, as he puts out his hand, oh, I have sleeping problems too. Maybe you come to Venezuela. Now, what I knew though at the time was I had just worked with the entire team that was his envoy, the Chinese envoy that was working with the Venezuelans when the Chinese were funding them. These guys were there to make sure Hugo didn't do anything crazy. The amount of stress I saw from working with Hugo Chavez on these guys inspired me to never look to making that phone call. We worked with, I've got to shut it down here, I could keep going easily for an hour, but we worked with the most famous hospital in China, the Military 301 Hospital. That is the president of China's hospital. Every minister and vice minister in central government, this is their hospital. When we left China, we left with 45 hospital contracts signed, both with public and private hospitals. And the device, 45 hospital contracts signed with public and private hospitals that are yet to be implemented with the government hospitals. We could start right now, but I need funding. That's not a big sample. But really, where we're at right now in China is this. The WHO came in about 10 years ago. Now for the Chinese to buy a needle that would have cost them 25 cents to produce, it is now costing them $8 to $10. They're becoming more powerful every day, looking at developing a model. They have to implement a healthcare system. But before they've implemented their healthcare system, with the WHO coming in, they're already bankrupt, looking at 1.6 billion people. So they recognize the need for sustainability. Their intention at this point is to use the device as the anchor to a wellness program to go once we start the preliminaries. Their intent is to use the device as an anchor to ultimately set forth a wellness integrated program across the country in all of the public hospitals, because they recognize that if they keep people from being sick, then they don't have the expense. And testing on the device can be brought very, very cheaply. So thank you very, very much.